Plumber found it on a Tuesday morning in early March, behind the drywall under the basement utility sink, and he called me at work and said, "Don't come home with anyone else, just you." I remember I was in the middle of a meeting when my phone buzzed. The number was his. I had it saved from when I hired him 2 weeks before, and I stepped out into the hallway to answer. He didn't sound alarmed exactly. He sounded careful, like a man choosing his words. I told him I'd be there in 20 minutes. I drove home from the office on Route 9 without the radio on. It was one of those early March days in Ohio, where the sky can't decide what it wants to do. The fields on either side were flat and grey-brown, patches of old snow still sitting in the low spots. I remember noticing a hawk on a telephone wire and thinking it looked cold. My wife had been gone for 14 months. Her name was Susan. She was 51 years old when she died, and she had spent the last 8 months of her life in a slow, confusing decline that 3 different doctors at 2 different hospitals had attributed to a rare autoimmune condition. She had been organized and methodical her entire adult life. The kind of woman who kept a binder for every major decision, who balanced the household accounts on the first of every month, who knew where every document was. She had built a small interior design business out of nothing, and she ran it out of a finished basement workspace she'd set up herself over 2 weekends, with shelving she assembled from scratch and a drafting table she found at an estate sale and refinished by hand. When she got sick, she stopped going down there. After she died, I couldn't go down there either. Not for a long time. There were sample boards still leaning against the wall, a fabric swatchbook left open on the table, a coffee mug with the handle toward the door, which was the way she always set it down when she was about to come back to it. For 14 months I walked past the basement door and kept it closed. In February I decided to sell the house. I didn't want to, not really, but I couldn't maintain it properly and I was rattling around in 4 bedrooms alone, and my daughter had been gently suggesting it for months. To prepare for the sale, I hired a plumber to check a slow drain under the utility sink, the one I'd been ignoring since before Susan got sick. I had told myself I'd deal with it eventually. Eventually had stretched into 2 years. The plumber's name was a compact, quiet man named Eugene. He had done some work for us years earlier, replaced the water heater, fixed a cracked pipe, and I'd always found him reliable and straight. When he called me that Tuesday, I didn't think he had found something dangerous. I thought maybe he'd found mold, or a structural issue with the wall, or something that would cost me a great deal of money and delay the sale. I did not expect what was actually there. He was waiting for me at the top of the basement stairs when I came through the back door. He had his hat in his hands, which I noticed because he was always wearing it. He said, "I'm going to show you something, and I need you to be ready for it not to be what you think." I asked him what that meant. He said he wasn't sure how to explain it. He said it would be easier to just show me. The utility sink was in the far corner of the basement, behind Susan's workspace, separated from the main room by a partial wall she had put up to keep the mechanical area out of sight when she was meeting with clients. Eugene had removed a section of drywall below the sink to access the drain trap. Behind the drywall, tucked into the wall cavity between 2 studs, was a metal fireproof document box, the kind with a latch and a combination lock. It was grey, about the size of a shoebox, and it had been wrapped in a plastic bag, and then wrapped again in a layer of foam padding that looked like it had been cut from packing material. It had not been there by accident. Someone had placed it there deliberately. Eugene said, "I didn't open it. I didn't touch it. I just saw what it was and called you." I thanked him. I asked him to give me a few minutes. I stood there in the basement for a while after he went upstairs. The drafting table was still there. The swatchbook was still open. The coffee mug was still where she had left it, handle toward the door. I crouched down and looked at the box. Susan had a system for combination locks. She used the same base sequence for almost everything, a variation on our wedding date. and I had always teased her about it being a security risk. I tried the combination I knew first. The latch opened on the first try. Inside there were 3 things: a sealed envelope with my first name written on the outside in her handwriting, a small thumb drive in a plastic case, and a yellow legal pad, folded in half, covered front and back in her handwriting, tight, neat cursive, the way she always wrote when she was working through a problem. I didn't open the envelope right away. I sat down on the floor with the legal pad first because I recognized the handwriting and the format, and I knew, without being able to explain how, that this was Susan working. This was Susan in problem-solving mode. This was her thinking on paper. She had dated the first entry. It was from 18 months before she died, 6 months before she got sick. I want to start from the beginning of what I found on the legal pad, because I think that's the only way to explain what happened next. The first page was a timeline. Dates on the left side, brief notes on the right. The dates went back almost 2 years from that first entry. The notes were in her shorthand, and it took me a few minutes to decode them. But once I did, I understood what I was looking at. 18 months before she died, Susan had started noticing irregularities in one of our investment accounts. We had used the same financial advisor for 11 years, a man I will call by his professional title only, because the legal proceedings are still ongoing, and we had given him considerable discretionary authority over a portion of our retirement savings. He had come highly recommended. We had attended his firm's client events. His name was on plaques in his office. He drove a sensible car. He sent Christmas cards. The irregularities Susan found were not dramatic at first. Small fees she didn't recognize. Line items described in language she found vague. She had always reviewed the statements herself every quarter because that was who she was. She had flagged a couple of items to me over the years, and I had said, "I'm sure it's fine. It's probably just how they categorize it." And she had dropped it. I want to say that clearly. She brought it to me, and I dismissed it, and so she started investigating on her own. Over 4 months she built a picture. She requested transaction histories going back 3 years. She called the fund companies directly rather than going through the advisor. She found a pattern: small unauthorized transfers, always below a threshold that would trigger automatic review, always with descriptions that look legitimate on the surface. A rebalancing fee here, a platform maintenance charge there. The individual amounts were not large, but they were consistent, and they added up. By the time she had the full picture, she estimated we had lost just over $40,000 over a 3-year period. She had then done something I didn't expect, given what I knew about her. She had not called an attorney. She had not reported it to the State Securities Board. She had not told me. The legal pad explained why. She wrote that she had gone to see the advisor in person without telling me. She had confronted him with the documentation she had assembled. She had told him she knew what he had done and that she intended to report it. She described the meeting in precise, almost journalistic detail. She wrote that he had not denied it. He had, instead, made a threat. He told her that if she reported it, he would tell people something about our son-in-law. I need to stop here and give some context, because this is the part that took me the longest to understand, and I think it matters. My daughter had been married for 3 years at that point. Her husband, I'll call him by his first name, Thomas, had struggled with addiction in his late 20s. He had been clean for 6 years when he married my daughter. He had gone through a program, done the work, and rebuilt his life completely. He was a good husband. He was present and honest and genuinely trying. My daughter knew his history. I knew his history. His own family knew his history. What Susan discovered during the months she was building her documentation was that the advisor had somehow obtained information about a period in Thomas's past that was more serious than what we knew, not drug use. A charge, something that had been expunged from the record through a legal process, handled quietly, years before Thomas met my daughter. Thomas had never told my daughter about it. He may not have known it could be found. The advisor, when Susan confronted him, made clear that if she pursued the matter, the information about Thomas would find its way to my daughter and to her employer and to people in her professional community. He had it in a form he could use. Susan believed him. She wrote that she had sat with this for weeks. She had considered going to an attorney quietly without involving Thomas or my daughter. She had considered telling my daughter everything and letting her decide. She had considered reporting it anonymously. Each option had consequences she had laid out in a column on the right side of the page in her methodical way. Lost money versus my daughter's marriage. Legal process versus what it would do to Thomas if the past surfaced publicly. Her own certainty about what was right versus mine. What it would cost the people she loved most. She chose to keep it contained. She stopped reporting it. She pulled our accounts from the advisor, which she did tell me at the time, and I remember her saying she just wanted to move our money somewhere with lower fees, and I had said, sure, whatever you think, and she built the case file in secret, and she hid it in the wall. She wrote that she hid it because she wanted me to have it eventually. She wasn't sure when or how I would find it, but she wanted it to exist somewhere. She got sick 4 months after the meeting with the advisor. I need to be careful here about what I say and what I don't say, because the doctors documented the diagnosis, and I am not a doctor and I cannot make claims about causation. What I can say is what was on the legal pad. In the last 2 pages, written in handwriting that was noticeably shakier than the earlier entries, she wrote them when she was already ill. Susan described a pattern she had noticed. In the months between her confrontation with the advisor and the onset of her symptoms, she had received several gifts from him: a bottle of wine at the holidays, a fruit basket in the spring, sent to the house. She had thought nothing of it at the time. He sent gifts to all his clients. She had written down the dates of the gifts and the dates of when her symptoms had first appeared. She had written one question: is this a coincidence? She had not drawn a conclusion. She had written, I don't know. I don't know. But if something happens to me, I want you to know this existed. She had written my name at the bottom of the last page. I sat on the floor of that basement for a long time after I finished reading. Eugene knocked gently on the door at the top of the stairs after a while and asked if I was okay. I said yes. I asked him if I could call him later about the drain. He said, of course, take all the time I needed, and I heard the back door close. I opened the envelope last. It was 2 pages in her handwriting, addressed to me. I'm not going to share all of it because some of it belongs only to me. But she wrote that she was sorry she hadn't told me sooner. She wrote that she knew I would want to have handled it myself, and that was exactly why she hadn't told me. She knew me. She knew I would have gone straight at him, and she believed that would have made the situation with Thomas and my daughter worse, not better. She wrote that she had wanted to protect all of us. She wrote that she trusted me to do the right thing with it when I found it, however long that took. She wrote that she loved me in a way she had never quite known how to say out loud, and that she hoped I knew it anyway. I did know it. I have known it for 26 years, but reading it in her handwriting in that basement in March was something else entirely. I called my daughter that evening. I asked her if I could come over, and she said yes, and I drove the 40 minutes to her house in Columbus, and we sat at her kitchen table and I told her everything. I told her about the box, about the legal pad, about the advisor, about the money. I told her about Thomas's past and the threat and why her mother had stayed quiet. My daughter was quiet for a long time after I finished. Thomas was in the other room. She called him in. She told him herself, sitting at that table. I watched my son-in-law hear something he had spent years trying to leave behind, and I watched my daughter reach across the table and take his hand before he finished processing what she was saying. Thomas looked at me. He asked me what Susan had done with the information. I told him she had protected him. She had protected all of us at a cost she had paid alone. He put his hands over his face. He sat like that for a while. My daughter didn't let go of his hand. I contacted an attorney the following week, not just for the financial fraud, the $40,000, the unauthorized transfers, but for everything Susan had documented. The thumb drive contained records she had obtained, screenshots, transaction logs, copies of correspondence. She had assembled it the way she assembled everything, thoroughly, carefully, with dates and cross-references and nothing left vague. The advisor was reported to the Ohio Division of Securities. He was also reported to federal authorities given the scope of what Susan had found. The investigation took time, these things always do, but the case was built largely on what Susan had left behind in that fireproof box behind a section of drywall in the corner of a basement workshop. Her documentation was that complete. He is no longer practicing. The legal matter is ongoing, and I've been advised not to say more than that. But I will say this: he is no longer practicing. The house sold in June. Before the closing, I went back down to the basement one last time. The drafting table was gone by then, and the shelving, and the swatch books. My daughter had taken some things, and I had donated the rest. The room was empty and smelled like old drywall and concrete. The section Eugene had removed had been patched and painted. I stood there for a while anyway. Susan had spent 2 years of her life carrying something she should not have had to carry alone. She had carried it because she was trying to protect the people she loved from pain they hadn't asked for and didn't deserve. She had been methodical and completely alone in it, and then she had gotten sick, and then she had died, and none of us had known. I think about the coffee mug sometimes, handle toward the door, the way she always left it when she was about to come back. She never came back, but she had found another way to stay. I still drive past that house sometimes, on my way to my daughter's place in Columbus. I don't stop, but I look at it from the road. I think about the fact that for 14 months, while I was grieving and not coping and keeping that basement door closed, the box was sitting in the wall, waiting. She knew I'd find it. She trusted that I would. That's the part I come back to more than anything else. Not the money, not the advisor, not even the threat. She knew me well enough to believe I would eventually open the door and deal with what needed dealing with. She believed that about me even at the end, when she was sick and scared and writing in handwriting that shook. I'd like to think she was right. I keep thinking about the combination. The same sequence she had used for years, built around a date we both knew by heart. She could have chosen anything. She could have made it impossible. She didn't. That was not an accident. Susan did very few things by accident. What she left in that wall wasn't just documentation. It was a decision, a final, deliberate act of trust. She trusted that I would eventually stop avoiding the basement. She trusted that when I found the box, I would know what to do. She trusted that the man she had spent 26 years with was worth protecting, even at the cost of carrying something alone that no person should have to carry alone. That kind of trust is not blind. It is earned. And I have spent a lot of time since that Tuesday in March thinking about whether I earned it or whether she simply believed I had. The man who stole from us did not steal $40,000. That number is real, but it's not the real loss. What he stole was 2 years of her mental and emotional energy. 2 years of a woman who was already running a business, managing a household, and being a wife and mother, and who spent a portion of every week quietly building a case against someone she had trusted because she understood that if she didn't, no one would. She did it carefully. She did it without complaint. She did it while protecting people who didn't even know they needed protecting. That is what I would call doing the right thing the hard way, not the righteous way, not the loud way, the hard way. The quiet, unglamorous, costly way that most people never see and no one ever applauds. I think about Thomas sitting at that kitchen table, and the way my daughter reached for his hand before he even finished hearing what I had to say. She didn't wait to decide how she felt. She already knew. That's what honest living over time builds in a person, the kind of clarity that doesn't need a moment to think. Thomas had spent 6 years rebuilding himself into someone his wife didn't hesitate over. That is not a small thing. That is the accumulated weight of 1,000 daily choices that nobody saw. And I think about Susan, who saw all of it, who understood what his past could cost him if it surfaced the wrong way, who made a calculation that was not about protecting a secret. It was about protecting a person who had already done the work of becoming better. There is a kind of intelligence in that which has nothing to do with being clever. It's the intelligence of knowing what actually matters and refusing to let noise drown it out. She had the documentation. She had the evidence. She had every justification to go straight to the authorities and let the consequences sort themselves out. But she looked at the full picture, not just what was true, but what the truth would do, and she made a harder call. I did not always do things the hard way. I was the one who said, "I'm sure it's fine." When she tried to tell me something was wrong, I was the one who kept the basement door closed for over a year, because it was easier than opening it. I don't say that to punish myself. I say it because it's accurate, and accuracy matters. What I try to carry forward from all of this is simpler than it sounds. Pay attention to what the people you love are actually telling you. Do the work to become someone worth trusting. And when something needs to be faced, face it, even when it takes you 14 months to find the door. She left it unlocked for me. The least I could do was walk through it.